Hello and welcome to this next video lecture of business statistics. As till now we have covered two units, or we can say two blocks. First one is introduction of statistics, next is central tendency. So in previous lectures, video lectures, we have already discussed various method of measuring central tendency. We have discussed three methods, mean, median and mode in detail with the help of numerical. Now our next topic, our next unit is dispersion, measure of dispersion. Now let's start with the discussion with the meaning of dispersion. Uh, Suppose you have a given data set. Someone have asked you to tell some interesting facts about the data series. So how can you do so? You can say that you can find the mean, you can find the median, and you can find the mode of that data series and tell about its distribution. Okay, so this is how you can do so, or you can tell someone about the data series. Till now, we have discussed mean, median, mode, which are the major and important measure of calculating central tendency. But it is this only thing you can do. Okay, are the central tendency the only way by which we can get to know about the concentration of the observation? No, the central tendency is not the only way for calculating the observations. So in this section or in this unit, we will learn about other measures to know the data. Okay, so the method we are going to discuss, or we are going to study about measuring data set, that is dispersion. So now in this video lecture, from now onwards, we will discuss dispersion. So we will also discuss various methods of dispersion for in numerical form also. Let's first understand the meaning of dispersion. So an average is basically very useful measure of center tendency of a series and a representative single figure of the series obtained by an average. Okay, average is also known as mean. However, we cannot get full information about the frequency distribution magnitude of the series on the basis of average, or you can say on the basis of mean. So for this purpose, the measure of dispersion is used, or this measure of dispersion are used. So, on the basis of central tendency or on the basis of average, the structure of statistical series basically can be of two types. On the basis of average, statistical series can be of two types. First one, basically their average may be the same, but formation of items may be different. The average may be same, but formation of the item may be different. Second one, their average may be different, but the formation of item may be same. So this is, so basically these are two structure of statistical series we have learned from central tendency or from calculating average. So, in order to basically understand the nature of series, study of dispersion or variation is also necessary. Okay, till now we have discussed center tendency to understand the nature of series, in which we have already discussed three type of series. So in mean, in the central tendency, while calculating mean, median, and mode, we have discussed three type of series. discrete series, continuous series, and individual series. So in order to understand the nature of series, study of dispersion or study of variation is also necessary. So in addition to the knowledge of average, an average does not tell the full story. It is very hard to fully represent of a mass unless we know the number in which the individuals scattered are sitting. Okay, so we have to do the calculation with the help of dispersion also. So if we talk about the what is dispersion is, so basically dispersion refers to the distribution of objects over a large region. So the degree to which numerical data are dispersed or skewed around an average value is referred to the distribution in business statistics. A vast amount of data will always be widely dispersed by firmly picked. So data can be widely spread like 0, 30, 60, 90, 120, 150 like this. It also be grouped in tiny data also like 1, 2, three, three, four, four, five, five, like this also. Okay. So the term basically, this term dispersion is refers to how dispersed our data, a set of data is. The measure of dispersion is always a non-negative real number that start at zero with when all the data is same and rise as the data get more varied. The homogeneity or heterogeneity of the scattered data is defined by dispersion measure. As you can also see in this given figure, there are measure of dispersion are spread in this figure also. It also refers how data differ from one another. So basically, as you can see in this figure, these three curves in this diagram basically represent three distribution with the same mean bar. Okay, mean bar means x bar. Mean bar means x bar. So they are represented with the same mean bar. Okay, so there are three different dispersion are given in this diagram, and they represent with the same mean bar. Okay, so the dispersion of all these three curves is same. You can say the mean of all these three curves is same, but the dispersion is different. Okay, so this is how we measure the dispersion. Basically, measure of dispersion are used to represent the scattered data. Okay, so this is basically used to represent the scattering of data. So these are the numbers basically that show the various aspects of the data which are spread across various parameters. Okay, so this is the meaning of basically dispersion. In dispersion, there are the numbers that show the various aspects of the data which are spread across various parameters. Okay, so dispersion in statistic is a way to describe how to spread out a scattered the data is around an average value. It also helps to understand if the data points are close together or apart. Okay, dispersion basically show the validity or consistency in a set of data. There are different measure of dispersion like range, standard deviation, mean deviation, variance. So these all type of measure of dispersion we will discuss in coming video lecture in detail also. So if we talk about the measure of dispersion, in statistic, so measure of dispersion measure the scattering of the data. Basically, it tells how the value are distributed in a given data set. Basically, in statistics, or you can say in business statistics, we define the measure of dispersion as various parameters that are used to define the various attributes of the data. So, these measures of dispersion capture variation between different values of the data. So, basically, there are two types of dispersion: absolute measure of dispersion and relative measure of dispersion. So, there are two types of measure: absolute and relative measure. And as you can see in this diagram, this absolute and relative measure have further following categories. As absolute measure are of further five types: range, variance, standard deviation, mean deviation, and quartile deviation. If we talk about relative measure, then relative measure is the coefficient of the absolute measure, like coefficient of range, coefficient of variance, coefficient of mean deviation, coefficient of quartile deviation. Okay, so let's understand the meaning of absolute measure of dispersion and relative measure of dispersion. If we talk about the absolute measure of dispersion, so the measure of dispersion which are expressed in term of original unit of a series are known as absolute measure. So basically absolute measure are expressed in concerned units like in meter, in dollar, in kilogram, in rupees, in centimeter, etc. So absolute measure are expressed in concerned unit only. Okay, such measures are not suitable for comparing the variability of two distribution. Basically, which are expressed in different unit of measure. So such measures, those are not suitable for comparing the validity or variability of two distribution which are expressed in different unit of measure. If we talk about the relative measure of dispersion, so the measure of dispersion which are measured as a percentage or ratio of a average are known as relative measure. So relative measure are sometimes known as coefficient of dispersion. As coefficient means a pure number that is independent of a unit of measure. So basically relative measure are also coefficient of various method of absolute measure. Okay. So this is the difference, or you can say this is the meaning of absolute measure and relative measure. We will also discuss their method in detail, absolute measure and relative measure. As we have seen, no, as we have seen in this picture also, there are various method of relative measure and absolute measure. If we talk about the absolute measure, the first one is range. Okay, so what is range? When we minus smallest value from the largest value, that is range. Okay, so range basically is the simplest of all the measure of dispersion. Range is also a method of absolute measure which is defined as the numerical difference between the largest item and the smallest item of a distribution. It cannot be usually employed to compare the variability of two distribution expressed in different unit. If we talk about the formula of range, then range is equal to largest item minus smallest item. L means largest item, S means smallest item. So range is equal to largest item minus smallest item. Okay, so basically range refers to the difference between each series minus and maximum value. The range offer as a good indicator of how dispersion the data is, but we need other measure of variability to discover the dispersion of data from central tendency measure. As a range is the most commonly and easily understandable measure of dispersion. It is a difference between two extreme observation of data set, as you can see in this formula also, in which represent the largest value minus the smallest value. So this is how basically it is the difference between two extreme observation of the data set. Extreme means one is the largest and one is the smallest. Okay, so this is how we calculate the range. Now, if we talk about the quartile deviation, so quartile deviation basically are the value that create quartile from the complete list. Quartile deviation are also part of absolute measure, which divide the distribution into multiple quartiles. Okay, which divide the distribution into multiple quarters. Quartile deviation is further divided into two categories: interquartile range and the semi-quartile range. Okay, interquartile range refers to the difference between the value of two quartile. If we talk about the semi-quartile range, it expresses as half of the difference between the upper quartile and the lower quartile. If we talk about the formula of quartile, so interquartile range is equal to 3 minus, as quartile deviation of two category, interquartile and the semi-quartile range. What is interquartile range? The difference between two quartile, Q3 minus Q1. If we talk about the formula of quartile deviation, which is semi-interquartile range, semi-interquartile range is equal to Q3 minus Q1 divided by 2. Okay, so this is the formula of semi-interquartile range and this is the formula of interquartile range. Okay, semi-quartile range, interquartile range formula is Q3 minus Q1 divided by 2, as it expressed as half of the difference between the upper quartile and the lower quartile. Okay, so this is how we calculate this. Next is mean deviation. What is mean deviation? As it is also a measure of dispersion, or you can say measure of absolute measure. So mean deviation basically the series in the arithmetic average of the deviation of various items from a measure of central tendency like mean, median and mode. So mean deviation is based on all the items of the series in order to convert it in a relative measure, which is coefficient of mean deviation, as it is divided by the average after calculating the mean deviation. If we talk about the standard deviation, it is also a measure of standard absolute measure. So basically in standard deviation is the square root of the arithmetic average of the square of the deviation, which is measured from the mean. Okay, what we have understand in while calculating the mean, In mean, we basically calculate the average of a given data series. But in standard deviation, we do the square root of the arithmetic average of the square of deviation, which we measure from the given data series. So basically, standard deviation is also known as a root mean square deviation. Okay, while calculating mean, we did not do the square root, but in calculating standard deviation, we do the root mean. Okay, we find out the square root in standard deviation. Okay, so as because it is the square root of the mean of square deviation, that's why this is also known as root mean deviation. If we talk about the coefficient of standard deviation, that is a part of relative measure in dispersion. It is used for the comparison of dispersion of two or more series with different unit, and it also helps in calculated, or you can say it will calculate by dividing the standard deviation by the mean of data. Okay, so now we will discuss these method numerically also.